In this video, I'm going to tell you all about the epic campaign game Aeon Trespass Odyssey and what I think of it. Welcome everyone, I'm Peter and this is the Esoteric Order of Gamers. Settle back and relax because we've got a lot to get through here. Aeon Trespass Odyssey is a huge campaign game. There are a gazillion pieces to it. It's very, very complicated. It'll keep you occupied for months and months and months. It comes in a huge white box. Yep, it's all white. There's a little bit of a varnish here, that's about it. And it's really unusual, and there's so much to say about this game. But before I get started, the first thing I want to say is thank you to Marcin and Bartek and the crew from Into the Unknown studio who sent me a copy of Aeon Trespass Odyssey. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, people over there. And I'm also going to be having a look at the expansion that's coming up with the second printing of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which is called The 12 Sins of Heracles. I'm not going to be looking at that in this video, but in a short addendum video, we're going to check that out as well. But first, let me tell you about Aeon Trespass Odyssey. There's so much to explore here, and after I've given you a quick overview of how it plays, I'm going to give you my personal opinion of the game. So, Aeon Trespass Odyssey, it's not a simple game. It's not even a simple name. There's a lot in this game, and it was inspired by Kingdom Death Monster, which was the hugely successful Kickstarter game produced some years ago. And obviously the creator of this game was a huge fan of that one because there's a lot of similarities here, but this has gone off in a whole imaginative journey of its own. And it ain't simple. Here's the rulebook. It's 80 pages long. Now you're probably thinking, if only Peter from the Esoteric Order of Gamers summarised that 80 pages so I didn't have to go through it all. Well, it just so happens I did. Here it is. It's just on a few sheets. There's a sheet for each of the major phases in the game, and there's some summaries of the keywords and things like that. I think you'll find this very, very useful. Also, I'm going to update it soon and make it even more useful. So if you're about to print it out, just hold off a little bit longer until I bring out the second version of it. But when I went through this rulebook, I thought, wow, this is going to be a tough one to summarise, and it was. But I think once you get it all summarised and you work it out, it's actually not too complicated. The basic systems are actually not that complicated. However, what do you do? Well, let me give you the background first. You're in a sort of dystopian, alternative, ancient Greece. You're the Argonauts, and you're on a huge city ship called the Argo, travelling around the islands of this ancient Greek land. Now, a huge cataclysm has destroyed the gods of Olympus, and the primordials have been released, which are monstrous creatures destroying the world. And you're going to fight them as you travel around, but you're not going to fight them as the Argonauts. No, it's not that simple. You're actually controlling 30-foot high titans, which are like huge kind of flesh mechs, really. They're like creatures, but you get into their brain and you control them on the battlefield, so you have a chance at beating these primordials. So very, very unusual theme, incredibly imaginative. And there's one thing I'll say through this entire review: the imagination on display here is quite amazing. I mean, there's so much imagination has gone into it. Wow, so many ideas. Even just the basic premises are a really exciting and different one. So the whole game is broken into two main things. One is exploration and story, and the other one is combat. Like Kingdom Death Monster, this is a very combat-focused game. Now, there are 3 campaigns that come with the game. They're called cycles. The first one is called The Truth of the Labyrinth. There are 2 others as well. You're probably looking at 300 hours of game time. Wow, you certainly, it's not cheap, but you certainly get a lot for your money. Now, you can play this, of course, with multiple players. Probably 4 is the ideal amount because there are 4 main Argonauts that you use during the game, so you could have 1 each. However, a lot of people, including myself, will be playing this solo. And I'll get into why later, because I think this is pretty much a solo experience. Though, a lot of people have enjoyed it with multiple players. But I'll tell you why I think it's probably more a solo game. So let me briefly go into the rules of the game. And again, this is just going to be brief. You've got a voyage and adventure phase, and that's when you're going to be traveling around the map. Now, the map is made up of tiles, and you'll be traveling around the Argo, which is this, as I said, this huge city ship. It's absolutely huge, and you'll be going around the different tiles. And as you go through the different tiles, you'll be exploring the map tiles and encountering things and getting story paragraphs from the Truth of the Labyrinth book. Now, this is not only full of story experiences, it's also full of setups for the various battles and all kinds of events. There are special rules for each cycle at the start of the game that add to the main rules, special events and all kinds of things like that. You'll also be controlling your game with the help of sheets, record-keeping sheets like this. Yes, there's quite a lot of record-keeping in this game. Now, there is an app for this. I found it easier, however, just to print out these sheets and use a pencil and keep things updated there. Each one of your Argonauts has their own little character sheet as well, so you can see there's quite a bit of record-keeping. As you travel around the tiles, each time you travel to a tile is a day, and you'll be keeping track of your journeys on this timeline. And on this timeline, you can note special events. You'll also be told when there are timeline battles, so you go to the battle map and have battles, and also opportunities for crafting gear. So what we have here are lots and lots of little mechanisms that interlock to give you the experience. When you're traveling around, every time you go to a new tile, you'll be drawing from the exploration deck, which are these little cards here. And this is a slightly unusual setup in that you draw a card and you keep drawing until you get an end stack symbol, and then you start drawing for another stack and you draw new cards until you get an end stack symbol on that one. And these cards mostly consist of getting resources. So you'll draw a card and it might say gain 5 monument resources, and you'll just note that on your sheet. So you're gathering resources as you go along. You'll be using these resources mostly for crafting gear later on. It'll also let you know if something called the adversary is activated. Now, as you get into the story, a monster will start chasing you around the board, and the cards will control whether it catches up to you or not. And if it does catch up to you, you're in for a vicious battle. Another mechanism this phase uses is probably inspired by the Arkham Horror card game. You have 2 cards which are running as part of the story, and one of them will have doom tokens being placed on it. The other one you'll have story tokens placed on it by various things. And these activate as a certain number of counters gathers on the card, which is the same thing that happens in Arkham Horror card game. As you go to certain tiles, they might have icons on them that add doom tokens and things like that. You may also find adventure icons that direct you to various adventures in the cycle book. So there are things like hub adventures, and there are also R&R adventures. Now, the hub adventures are broken up into various different stories. They're tracked on the adventure track on your card. So, for example, there's the Plight of the People storyline, and you tick off boxes as you do parts of that storyline. Or the Hidden in Plain Sight storyline, or Tears of a Minotaur. So you can have concurrent adventures happening at the same time. Makes it a little bit hard to keep track of them all in your head, but it all leads together into a big overarching story. Now, as you're looking through those adventure paragraphs, of course, they'll lead to other paragraphs. You may have tests to make and things to do, and you may get more resources. Your diplomacy rating may change with each of the 3 main factions. In the case of Cycle 1, that's the Minoans, the Labyrinthians, and the Hornsworn. And depending on your diplomacy level with those various factions, various things might happen depending on the story. So, as you can tell, there's a lot of stuff here, and it's very well written for the most part. Another thing you'll be doing is advancement and research, and there's a whole heap of cards here which have various projects which you can create and then turn into stuff that can make you gear and help you in combat and do all kinds of things like this. So, for example, you can have trireme armor and weapons and things that send over arrow barrages into the middle of combat. And every time you activate one of these cards, or you choose one of these cards, it has a leads to box, which leads to a whole lot of other project cards. So you build up this deck of projects, and then when you get the opportunity, you can research them. You pay for them with the gear that you've been recording on your sheet here. So, an advancement may cost, 5 monuments and 1 armament and blah, blah, blah. And then you get that card, and then you can use it from then on. There are also large cards here that give you other technological things. Some of these are basically reference cards for various mechanics during the game. And of course, once you get these cards, you can start building gear as well, and good old weapons and armor and stuff like that. There is a whole deck of different cards that you can choose from. You can see heaps and heaps of those. And there's different ones for each cycle as well. So you'll find that for the first cycle, you'll only be using some of the content in the box. It isn't until you move to the other cycles which you'll be using the content for those ones as well. Now, of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much else going on. Each one of your individual Argonauts, which has a character card here, has a bunch of stats, of course, so that can be helpful during tests. And they have something called Memnos. And these are individual cards they can get, which are basically individual stories for those Argonauts. And as the Memnos events are triggered, you go through and you mark these boxes, and eventually you can trigger special abilities and various things on these Memnos cards. So you can personalize each one of the Argonauts as well. So that's very basically the voyage and adventure phases. Now, what about battle? Well, there's a lot of battle in this game, and you'll be encountering horrible primordials, which you'll be fighting over and over again. Now, mostly the battles are called timeline battles, and they're marked on your timeline so you can see them coming and you can plan for them in advance and make sure you have the right gear and everything. However, you can be unlucky and draw battles just in the cards or in story events as well. So you never quite know when one of these battles is going to come up. When you do, you put your tiles aside on your mammoth table where you're keeping all this. In my case, I had to put it on top of a game box, or so I could move it aside. And then you set up your battle, and this uses this battle board. In this case here, I have the neoprene mat, but there's also a cardboard version of this. You look up the actual battle that you're about to play in the cycle book, and it tells you how to set it up. Now, you're only fighting a number of creatures in each of these cycles. So in the first cycle, you've only got three main creatures, and then you've got the adversary. So you're going to be getting to know these monsters quite well. And the idea of this, of course, is that you get to know their individual strategies, and you get to know how to exploit them and how to win the battles. Not only that, they're going to get more and more powerful as you fight them. You'll be marking the levels of them as you go along on the evolution track on your sheet, and they're going to get nastier and nastier as you go along. Not only that, they're going to get nastier and nastier as you fight them, because this game has something called, wait for it, the Inverted Combat Paradigm, TM. Yes, it's the highfalutin name for the fact that instead of things getting less and less powerful as they're hit and damaged in this game, everything gets more powerful, so it raises the stakes as you're playing. It's an interesting idea and quite a fun one, and certainly makes for very spectacular battles, but I'll get into that in the review section of this video. So you set up this board. It only comes with tiles. I'm using my own fancy plastic pieces for the columns and things here, so these don't come with the game, but it has tiles that you place. It has, of course, miniatures, which I've painted up, and you set those up on the board and you start the combat. How does the combat work, I hear you ask? Well, let me tell you. Now we move away from record sheets and we come to this. We have each one of our Argonauts here, and each one of them has one of these sheets. And they also have something called a Triskelion, which is basically a very, very fancy name for 3 dials and 3 numbers. And on this you've got Rage, Fate and Danger, which are the 3 main statistics you'll be using as you fight. You've also got a trauma table on your character card, whatever you call it. And you've got a Kratos table, and this is part of the escalating danger and excitement as each battle goes on. I'll explain it in a moment. Now, each monster has its own dedicated cards, and they come in an AI deck and a BP or body part deck. And each one of these comes in 3 stages. You start with stage 1 of the AI deck and body part deck, and you have the character card for the creature itself, and it has the information which is common to the creature, and then it has changing stats depending on the level of the creature. So at the start of the game, for a while, you're just going to be fighting level 1 creatures, and you can look at the sheet here and you can see, in the case of this horrible thing, it's got a 2-hit number of 8+, it's got a movement of 6, and it's got a wounds of 10. One of the interesting things about the battles is that you don't necessarily have to kill the creature. Depending on what stage of the game you're up to, you may only have to inflict a few wounds on the monster before you have the opportunity to escape. And you probably really do want to escape in those early rounds of the game. So the primordial, the thing you're fighting, gets to start first, and it does that by drawing one of these AI cards, and it tells you what the primordial does. It tells you where the target is, depending on a certain number of criteria, what it does, which is usually move and attack, and then you have to roll dice. Now, it doesn't roll to hit you, you roll a number of dice to evade its attack. So the primordial always hits, you just have to try and evade those hits. So in this case, it's a pincer pierce, and it says 3 dice, 10 plus. So this is the adversary, which is a pretty nasty creature. So I have to roll 3 dice, and I have to roll a 10 plus to evade the attack. The card then tells me how much damage is done with each attack, which usually means adjusting the danger number on my Triskelion, and then it may have some other special abilities, like, most commonly, knockdown. Now, get used to that word knockdown, because you're going to be hearing it a lot. You're knocked down a lot. And not only knocked down, but knocked back as well. You get thrown all over the place in your Titan, in your big 30-foot Titan that you're controlling the brain of. It gets tossed around like a rag doll by these huge primordials. Primordials. Okay, so if you've managed to survive the horrific attack, and they also have things like signature moves and stuff as well, which are cards next to the main character card. So you might get a really nasty monster that doesn't attack and then does a signature attack. Or you might attack it and it might signature attack you back, which is just horrifically bad. However, once it's attacked, it's now the turn of the Titans. So each one of the Titans gets a chance to attack using their weapons. Now, when you play your first battle of the game, which is against this horrible looking thing, you can only use your fists. And of course, you're fighting a creature which is basically made up of fists, which I'm sure they had a big chuckle about when they created this in the studio. So that's not much fun, but later on you'll be crafting gear and you'll get swords and weapons. And because they're 30-foot tall Titans, you don't get normal swords and weapons. You get things like a shipwrecker shield, which is basically half a ship. So it's holding a huge ship. Now on each one of these cards, there's a number of dice to roll and a modifier to the chance to hit, and also the damage dice you roll. So for example, this one may have 2 dice. You roll 2 dice and you look on the monster's character sheet, character card, and says you need an 8 plus. I haven't got any modifiers, so I need an 8 plus to hit. Now, if I hit, it's not over yet. The poor old Titans basically have to kind of hit twice, because you've got to hit and then you've got to damage. So, say I hit with that dice, I then draw a body part card and it tells me where I hit the monster. In this case, on its large moth wing. There's a number on this card that I have to beat in damage to actually damage the thing. And for that, we use these red dice. Now, if I've got, say, 2 hits, I might roll 2 of these. Depends on the weapon and everything, of course. And I get 1 as for just being a Titan as well. So I did 2 hits with the Shipwrecker Shield, and I add 1, and I've got 3 dice. I roll these, and I need these symbols to beat the number on the card. If I do that, I've finally wounded the thing, and I get to keep this card as a wound. So that's marked as a wound. Now, that's not too complicated, I hear you say. You know, that's fine. However, there are a few more things to remember along the way. Every time you roll a dice, you roll one of these white dice as well, and that's a critical chance. So if you roll the dice and the white one comes up a 10, you also might do a critical hit or a critical evade, and those states will be mentioned on the card. For example, if you do a critical hit and then you manage to wound it on the body part card, it may give you some special advantage for the fact that you got a critical hit, which is usually a very good thing. There are other modifiers to the dice rolls as well that come in the form of these Kratos tokens. Now, at the end of every Titan's turn, depending on how much rage they have on their Triskelion, they have a Kratos table here, and they can reference these and probably leave some of these tokens behind for the next Titan to use. So it's quite strategic. They don't leave these tokens for themselves. They leave these tokens to increase hit and damage chances for the next Titan. It's a very unusual system and works well. However, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to remember in the heat of battle. Now, what's fate, you ask? Well, fate is a number on here, and you can increase this to allow you to re-roll evade and hit chances. Not damage, just evade and hit. You've got to be careful with fate, because the higher the fate goes, the more damage and horrible things that might happen to you as a result of a creature's AI effects. For example, a primordial might do 2 per hit damage to you, but if your fate is over 3, it might do 3 damage to you. So the more fate you use to mitigate your chances of hitting, the more chance that bad hits can happen to you. There's trade-offs and all kinds of stuff going on. There's also a third number on the Triskelion, and that is rage. Every time you attack the primordial, you increase your rage by 1. Now, the person with the highest rage gets the target priority token, so it tends to get attacked the most. But the higher your rage, the higher you go on the Kratos table and the more tokens you can leave behind for the next Titan to improve their chances to hit and damage. And also it gives you the advantage, depending on the table, to do things like re-roll damage dice or even get an extra damage dice. But wait, there's more. There's also a bunch of trauma decks. Every time you take damage or danger, you have to draw from a trauma deck, depending on what level of danger you're up to, and it's referred to on your character card here. Now, the good thing about these trauma decks is they're not just something horrific happens to you. Sometimes they're great advantages. So you can actually, as you're getting more and more damage, you can get more and more heroic. So actually drawing a trauma card isn't always a bad thing, and it often just adds some spice to the combat and makes it more exciting. Now, as you can tell from all this inverted combat paradigm means that you're getting angrier, you're getting more abilities when you get angrier, you're also getting more chances to leave tokens to help other Titans to battle, but the monster is also getting more powerful because every time you wound the monster, you put in a card from the next stage up. So if you wound it and take a level 1 body part card, you shuffle in a body part stage 2 card into the deck. Then, after doing that, you discard a level 1 AI card and shuffle in a level 2 AI card. So the monster's capabilities are getting stronger, its body parts are getting harder to hit, but at the same time you're getting angrier and getting more abilities. Everybody's getting angry! So, that's a brief overview, and as you can see, there's a lot going on. Now, it's quite complicated and there's a lot to remember, but it's also a very cinematic combat system. But I'll go into that more in the review. For the meantime, that's roughly how you play. Got that? Okay, let's get on to my personal thoughts about Aeon Trespass Odyssey. So, where do I begin when it comes to my personal thoughts on Aeon Trespass? It is, like the primordials that you're fighting, an absolute monster. There's so much stuff here, and the first thing I have to say right up front is that I am in awe of the creativity involved here and the amount of just hard graft that must have gone into making this game. As someone who, in their professional capacity, is a graphic designer and has worked on many board games, I know how difficult it is to create a game from scratch, not only the design phase, but the production phase, and this is a beautiful production. The design is great, except for the box. I'm not too keen on the all-white box, but everything else is gorgeous and really gets across that lovely feel of the ancient Greeks, especially these beautiful little illustrations on all the cards, which are done in the style of ancient Greek pottery. The miniatures are great, and as you can see, incredibly imaginative. Look at that amazing, huge thing. And in fact, when you're fighting, something I didn't mention is that you can actually jump on vantage points on the actual models. So in some cases, you can take a piece of the model itself and replace it with a little platform which the Titan can then stand on, and you get special advantages for attacking while actually riding like a bull, or, you know, exactly like a bull in the case of this monster. So there's so much imagination here, and it's really, really impressive. But is it fun? Well, the only way you can answer that is to play it yourself, because reviews are very, very subjective. I am going to give you my personal opinion, but please keep in mind that I know this is a very, very popular game among lots of people. I've read reviews that call it a masterpiece. And while I personally don't agree with that assessment, it's only because of my personal tastes and the circumstances that I find myself in when it comes to playing games these days. The first thing is this is a huge time and table hog. So I only get an opportunity to play games once or at the most twice a week. And if we sat down to play Aeon Trespass once a week, we'd be here for months and months on this game alone. Now, there's two reasons I can't afford to do that. One is because I like variety in my games, and I like to play lots and lots of different games. And two is because I review games as a part-time thing in my own spare time. So I have to get onto other games as well. That's why I've chosen to play this game solo. I did give it a go with 2 players, and we didn't find it as engaging as we usually like to enjoy when we play games. And that's because the adventure and exploration phase is pretty much a solo activity. You're just reading paragraphs from a book and doing note-taking and things like that. It's not really a game per se. And then when you get into the combat phase, it really is just straight combat. Now, of course, I've played and enjoyed Oath Sworn into the Deepwood by Shadowborn with 2 players for quite a long time now, and I really enjoy that one. And you'd think, well, that's very, very similar. However, in that one, I find the combat system a more engaging 2-player experience. This one feels like more of a solo experience. So I've had it set up on my table here for several months and have gone back to it when I've wanted to play some more. But as I said in my ISS Vanguard review, I'm not really a big solo gamer. There's only so much time for games, and I prefer to spend that time either working on the Esoteric Order of Gamers or playing in a sort of social environment with friends. But I completely understand that some people absolutely love solo gaming, and this is the kind of thing you're really going to immerse yourself into for a long time. It's like playing a video game for 80 hours and stuff like that. If you like that kind of thing, I think you'll really like Aeon Trespass. For me, there's probably 2 reasons why I'm not engaged enough to really get involved in this kind of game. One is, of course, my flightiness with games, and the fact that by inclination, and also because of the Esoteric Order, I want to go from game to game and play different things and try different things all the time. This one demands a big commitment for a long period of time, which I can't really fulfill. The other thing is that as I get older, I start looking for simpler games. Now, it's not because I'm getting dumb and simple, it's because I've played lots and lots of, well, maybe I am getting dumb and simple, I don't know. Anyway, I've played lots and lots of games, and as I get older, I want to play ones that are sort of simple and elegant and don't have this sort of level of crunchy detail that I have to remember. I play games for the fun and the immersion and the experience. And while there's certainly a lot of immersion here, there's also a lot of hard work and a lot of bookkeeping and keeping track of stuff and things like that. And I personally don't enjoy that kind of stuff anymore these days. I was thinking about this and I was reminded of the old Dungeon Master's Guide, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, which came out when I was about 13 years old. Now, at the time, I got into this book and I was so excited by it. There's so much detail in here. It's written in a very dry academic style, but my imagination went on total overdrive and I devoured every rule that was in this book and absolutely loved it. If I was younger and still in that mindset, I would absolutely love a game like this because it has that same level of crunchy detail and total immersion. But these days, I'm more flighty and less patient, so I like something a little bit more straightforward. So let's look at the 2 main parts of the game. The first one is the adventuring and story phase, where we're moving the Argo to the different tiles on the board and encountering story elements. This phase, I found I really wanted to get more into the story elements because the actual game part of it is, to me, kind of a bit bookkeepy. You draw cards from the exploration deck, and most of them are pretty much just noting down extra resources on your record sheet. So I don't find that very interesting or engaging. And of course, because it's a card deck and it's the luck of the draw, you may, as I did, find yourself getting into a lot of extra battles which you didn't want to get into, and having to fight the adversary, which is an extremely powerful opponent when you're weak early on in the game. And you're wanting to get more into the story and exploration, and you might find yourself dragged to the very large and time-consuming combat stage, a bit more than you wanted to. On the whole, I enjoyed the story elements. Again, it's like a choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing, and you get to do tests and make choices and things like that, and it's quite interesting. I think that all of these kind of choose-your-own-adventure type story elements suffer from the problem that they're trying to tell a connected story, but of course, they can't railroad you into the same sequence of story events. So sometimes it feels like the story events are kind of disjointed and not really advancing the stories. They're just things that happen. Now, of course, over time, these things aggregate into the feeling that you've got a whole adventure that you've been on and all these exciting things have happened. But on the whole, I find these story elements not really a game per se, but really just an enjoyable, imaginative experience. Now, the other thing you'll be doing a lot of during this phase is crafting and researching different projects, which you can then turn into crafting items and getting advantages. Now, again, this is something that a lot of people really enjoy, especially those brought up on video games where crafting is a big thing. And again, for me personally, I don't find it that engaging. But obviously, this is totally a personal opinion. If you really enjoy that crafting element, you're going to love it in this game. There's a lot of detail and a lot of choices in that department, and you can go on to get heaps and heaps of different weapons, and you can decide which weapon is slightly better than another weapon like that. For me, I just, don't find that interesting, but I totally understand that some people do. So again, it comes down to the same thoughts I had on this kind of thing for ISS Vanguard by Awakened Realms. If you enjoy that kind of solo paragraph reading, bookkeeping combination, you're going to absolutely love this. So let's get on to the combat phase. Now the combats are quite long and involved, and there's lots to remember. And this combat system is very interesting and obviously very much based on the Kingdom Death game, even though I've never actually played that one. In that it has the AI deck, which controls what the primordial does, and the body parts that you attack as you try and wound it. Now, there's lots of granular detail here, and of course, it's all built into this idea of things getting stronger as it goes along. So you have the 3 different stages of AI deck and BP deck. But I personally had problems with this combat system. It's very fiddly, and there are lots of things to remember. For example, let's take the Kratos tokens. At the end of a Titan's turn, they get rid of any Kratos tokens that they use during their turn, and they lay down their own selection of Kratos tokens depending on how much rage they have. Okay, that sounds fine, but it's something that's really easy to forget. And I may be the only person here, but I found myself over and over forgetting whether I'd put the Kratos tokens down or not for a particular Titan. It's definitely part of the strategy, but is the fiddliness worth the game effect that it has? And I asked that about a lot of the mechanics in this game. I feel like the creator or creators were just so full of ideas that they wanted to get them all down. And there's kind of a feel of a game designer here who's just doing their first game. The thing is that Kickstarter allows you to produce a mammoth, amazing looking thing like this with miniatures and the whole bit and everything. And there is a tendency to throw everything but the kitchen sink, well, including the kitchen sink, into the system because it leads to more stuff and more things to do, and that feels exciting and more immersive. However, I would argue that the mark of a really good game designer is to sometimes sacrifice those rules that you really, really enjoy for the sake of the overall experience. So, for example, the Kratos tokens are a great idea, and I think it's interesting that you're always thinking about supporting the next Titan, the other person's go. That's a really nice idea. Is it implemented here in a really smooth, thematic, easy to remember kind of way? Not so much. So is that rule worth it? Or is there another way of doing it that is simpler and more straightforward? Similarly, the way that the monster gets more and more powerful it goes on kind of stops the flow of the game, because when you do a wound, you have to take a body part card of the next stage up, shuffle it into the body part deck, and then you have to go and get the first AI card of the stage that you just wounded, take that out of the deck, get another card of the next stage up and shuffle that into the AI deck. So that leads to a stronger monster as it goes along. However, that shuffling of the deck, putting the new one in, is kind of busy work in the middle of what should be a really exciting combat. Again, it feels like a clever system, but the way it's implemented, you think, well, is all this trouble worth it, or is there a different way of doing it that could have got the same effect but have less interruption in the flow of the combat round? There's also something fundamental about the philosophy of this type of game, and it comes from Kingdom Death Monster. And it comes also from video games like Dark Souls, and that is difficulty. And the fact that you start off really weak and it's very, very hard to beat things, and you slowly, after crafting lots of items and going through the game, get more powerful and can do more spectacular things. Now, I understand that a lot of people would enjoy that kind of gameplay, but for me, when I have a combat and I'm fighting a huge monster, and especially when I'm piloting a 30-foot tall Titan, I want to feel really powerful and heroic. And after I got knocked down for the 27th time, I just started thinking, it's just so frustrating. Now, obviously, I have to get further through the game, and maybe during the end of the cycle, I get really powerful and I feel strong. However, I wonder if that's true, because the monsters are going to be getting much more powerful as well. So we're going to be going up at the same level. So it's that kind of trade-off, isn't it? I mean, and again, it's a personal thing. It's all about personal taste. If you enjoy that kind of struggle, that kind of survival element that comes with something like Dark Souls, the video game, which is really hard to play, but then you get that incredible sense of satisfaction when you beat the monster that was really hard to beat. And you will be trying to beat the same monsters over and over again, because in the first cycle, you're only getting 4 monsters to to battle. So you're going to be fighting them over and over again. Get to know their strategies, try and come up with strategies and gear that counter those particular monsters, that kind of thing. All of which is stuff that some people are going to love and some people aren't. Another thing that makes you feel a little bit weaker is that the primordials themselves just have one devastating attack, and sometimes two if they play their signature move as well, whereas the Titans have to hit kind of twice. Not only do they have to hit, but then they have to wound, and it can be very frustrating to finally get a hit in when it's like sort of 8+ or something to hit, and you can do a really good hit, and then you can draw a body part card and you just don't have a chance in hell of beating that number and damaging it. And this kind of thing can kind of lead to frustration. And again, in a combat system, I want to feel as if I'm heroic and doing exciting things. I don't want to feel like their game is putting roadblocks in front of me to beat this thing, that it's really, really hard. That said, of course, because you have this inverted combat paradigm that they call it, when you do beat a monster, it's incredibly satisfying, and you do have heroic moves. And one of the things I really enjoy about the system is that when you get damaged, you draw one of these trauma cards, and they're not always bad. Sometimes they give you a chance for another attack or some kind of heroic thing you can do. That aspect I really enjoy because it gives you positivity and it pushes things forward. I feel like other things are pushing you back, like being knocked back over and over again and having to basically miss a turn. This kind of thing is pushing the combat forward, and I'd love to see more of that. I hate to mention Oathsworn again, but also in Oathsworn you're fighting large creatures and they have a habit of throwing you around the board, so it feels like, you know, those cinematic combats where you're getting picked up and thrown over there. However, in that game, there's always a sense, because you've got all these different cards you can play for your different combat moves, there's always a sense that you're doing different things and that, you know, you're getting thrown over there, but you're picking yourself up and jumping from tree to tree and doing something spectacular. It's more of a superhero-y kind of feel. And again, that's just a different approach. This one is more of a struggle against overwhelming odds. And I must admit, even though these AI decks do all kinds of different things, I just didn't feel the sense of these primordials being really, really distinctive. And I felt that a lot of the time, I was probably missing out on a lot of the strategy that comes later in the game, but I felt like a lot of the time the Titans were really just running up to the monster and trying to hit it with the one good weapon that they had, then getting thrown over somewhere at the other side of the board, and then having to run up and hit it again. And the combat felt a bit samey to me. I would prefer a list of things that the Titans could do. Some more options than just hitting with a weapon or shooting with a ranged weapon. So that's my sort of mixed and troubled approach to the combat system. Some great stuff here. And, you know, if I had the time and really wanted to get into it, there's lots of rewards to be had. It just didn't have the kind of combat feel that I want out of a game. But if you like that sense of struggle against overwhelming odds and then occasionally doing something heroic and the dice going your way and everything going your way and doing that devastating wound, that can really happen here and can really get that sense of sort of Clash of the Titans heroism. So again, I find myself in the same situation as I did with ISS Vanguard. I really admire this piece of amazing work, and I think that for the right player, it's going to be fantastic. If you love playing deep, immersive solo games, if you love the story elements and exploring that story, because there are hundreds of hours of content here, it'll keep you busy forever and ever. If you don't mind doing the same battles again, over and over again with the same monsters and getting to know their strengths and weaknesses and coming up with strategies and crafting the right cards to match those strategies, you can see there's a lot on offer here and a lot to enjoy. For me, I have to move on to something else and get this off the table because I just don't have the time to devote to it and to really get into it deeply, and I'm not a huge solo gamer. Again, that is just my personal opinion. I hope you've seen from this review all the good things that Aeon Trespass has to offer, and this has given you an insight into the kind of game that it is. Now, as I said, I'm going to be looking at the 12 Sins of Heracles, which is going to be the expansion for Aeon Trespass. They've sent me a link to an online simulation of that, and I'll be checking it out, and I'll do a short review of what I think, and we'll have a look and see what's changed in that upcoming expansion. So check that out. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment. I reply to every comment. I'll have relevant links in the show notes, of course, and also there's all my social media to sign up, things like that. Go and check out the website. As I said, by the time I post this video, I will have updated my Aeon Trespass rules and reference sheets. So you can go to the website and download them for free, print them out, laminate them, put them in the box. I think you'll find this a lot easier to use than going through that 80-page rulebook. Though I must say the 80-page rulebook has an excellent index, which is something you just don't see enough of, and I was really impressed with. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe, hit all notifications, and check out my hundreds of other videos that I've posted in the past. I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Good gaming. Bye for now.